chemicals. And when the war ended, they no longer had the US government buying all those chemicals from them. So they needed a market. And so the market they worked out they could sell them to was the home lawn owner. And so one of the most famous ones, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. It is colloquially known as T4D. Now this got developed in World War II, but it got really famous in Vietnam. Now, does anyone know what the other name for 2,4-D is? Yes?
Agent Orange.
Agent Orange, exactly. So this is a broadleaf weed killer, and it is still in a lot of chemicals that are sold in hardware stores. So if you read the labels on the chemicals, it's in a lot of them, and people still put it on their lawns. That's not really a good thing because it's been linked to some pretty bad cancers. And in fact, in 1986, the National Cancer Institute found that Kansas farmers who'd used this for 20 or more days a year had 8 times higher risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So not a good thing to be using on your lawn. Now, what are people trying to get rid of with all these chemicals? Because that's just one of many, and most of them are not very good for human health. So what are these horrible, horrible things we're trying to get rid of? Well, take crabgrass, for example. A lot of people who are obsessed with perfect turf grass are very down on crabgrass. But the thing is, crabgrass was one of humanity's oldest cultivated crops. This is something that people grew intentionally for thousands of years. In fact, in Switzerland, they've found Stone Age crabgrass in archaeological sites going back thousands of years to the Stone Age. And in China, they were cultivating it 5,000 years ago. So this is, if you see it in your lawn, most lawn owners, most turf owners in America would see crabgrass and go, "Oh, the enemy!" and take out these chemicals. But it's actually been used for a long time. And the whole reason it was brought to the US in the first place was as a forage crop. Because the native grasses, until they got here to the Midwest where we have good grass, the native grasses on the East Coast were actually very low nutritional value. And the livestock were getting very thin and getting very sickly because the grasses on the East Coast could not support them. So they actually brought in crabgrass intentionally to feed the livestock. Plantain, one of my favorites, also known as white man's footsteps, because everywhere the white men went, the plantain grew. And this one used to be gathered for birdseed, even into the 30s. And my personal favorite, the dandelion. I love dandelions. Dandelions actually, 357% RDA of vitamin K. So they have as much vitamin K as kale, which is pretty amazing. In Japan, they've done a lot of research which found that dandelions actually are probably anti-cancer. So these are anti-carcinogenic. And so I just find it very ironic that people are spraying Agent Orange on their lawns to get rid of an herb that is an anti-cancer herb. But there's no accounting for people. No accounting for people. Other dangerous things on lawns. You have the lawn flamingos. These came out on the market in 1957 because people saw all this turf and they wanted something other than turf, and this was the most artificial thing they could come up with. They're colorful, at least. Okay, the nuts and bolts. Today, Americans spend $105 billion every year on their lawns. Now, to put that into context, the U.S. Department of Education's budget is $174.97 billion. The donations received by U.S. churches in a year are $124.52 billion, and the total funding received by all libraries in the U.S. combined altogether is $14.61 billion. So just compare this, please. We have $105 billion on lawns, $14.61 billion on libraries.
What are we going to do about that, Gabriel?
What are we going to do about that? We really do. And you know, here's the thing. Americans use 800 million gallons of gas each year just to run lawn equipment and spill 17 million gallons of it. Okay, how much is gas per gallon these days? It's around $4 per gallon, right?
Yeah, well, it's nationwide, yeah.
Nationwide, it's around $4 per gallon. So what's 4 times 17 million?
Yeah.
Someone better, and that's just what gets spilled every year. And you know, we could sit here and have a debate that lasted all year about the environmental impact and the morality of growing these lawns. I just think that's a lot of money getting poured straight down the grass. And this was really fascinating to me that in terms of emissions, a 4-stroke lawnmower creates as much emissions in 1 hour as a regular vehicle driving 500 miles.
And that is because they're not regulated to the levels that automotive stuff is for emissions control.
Yeah.
Because it makes it even more expensive.
Yep. Yeah. And so they actually account for 5% of all air pollution. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the world, here we have France. This is the place that gave us manicured lawns in the first place. These were the guys who invented it. And yet, the lawns in their public spaces are pretty minimal. You can see this is in Paris, and this is a big public park in Paris, and yet the lawns are really tiny. And here's Versailles, you know, the source of lawns, and compared to the overall landscape, it's still a fairly, I'm not going to say minor, but it's not the whole deal. It's not the whole thing. And this is the place that invented the idea of lawn as conspicuous consumption. In Spain, beautiful park. This one is a mosaic park in Barcelona. Don't see any grass there, not really. What's it like in Brazil?
Not too much.
Not too much?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where else are people from? Yeah.
I'm from Venezuela, and I mean, in some cities, the people grass mowed, but it's not like like a cultural thing.
Not like here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody from anywhere else? Yeah. I lived in Japan for a year, and in Japan, the gardens tend to be a combination of flowers, water, and raked gravel. They're big on raked gravel in Japan. And coming back home, because a lot of people have been looking at things like the carcinogenic chemicals used to kill anti-cancer plants, they're looking at all that gas that's just going into the groundwater, and they're starting to say, okay, maybe we're wasting a lot of money doing things we don't necessarily need to do. And so there are people here in Iowa who have developed this Protect Iowa group, this idea of protecting wildlife, soils, and environment with native plants. Because soil is one of our best natural resources here, so we've got to protect it. We shouldn't be dumping gas into it. And there's a pamphlet being distributed to help people understand how to better encourage native plants. And I think this is pretty fun. So this is the same yard, and this is in Davenport. So this is a yard when the people bought their house, where it's just a lawn, and this is after they've converted it to native wildflowers. And they've also taken pictures of all the different wildlife that is now visiting their yard. So we have all sorts of butterflies and hummingbirds. At one point I was talking to someone who was saying, oh, I could never have long grass. I don't know what might be in there. I just wanted to say, yeah, you don't know what might be in there. And besides the butterflies, there's the fireflies. It's an interesting thing that fireflies have actually evolved so that they need long grass to carry out their mating rituals. That different species of fireflies have to fly at different levels from different pieces of grass, or they won't see their mates. That if you're a 6-inch firefly, you will see your lady love firefly at 6 inches. But if your lady love firefly is at 1 inch, you won't understand that that's your true love. Now, up in Dubuque, they actually have a Mowing to Monarchs program where they actually will give households up to $250 worth of prairie plant plugs and seeds to convert their yards to native plants to encourage the monarch butterflies and to not mow their grass. $250 to not mow your grass and to plant flowers is a pretty good deal. The idea is you're trading the mowing habit for monarch butterflies, mowing to monarchs. And people who do that, because the neighbors will often not understand why they're doing it and sit back and sort of frown and tap their foot and say, well, back when I was a kid, my mom always cut the ends off of the ham and my dad always kept the grass mowed. And so people will put signs in their yard explaining what they're doing. So here are some examples of those. There's the do not mow, there's the native prairie, and all of these are signs to help explain what people are doing. And I just love this quote, and so I'm going to finish up with it. Gardening from a prairie perspective means opening up our hearts and minds to these small wonders, as well as to a different method of design and landscape to management than traditional landscaping. Gardening from a prairie perspective means opening up to the perceptions and cultures of other creatures and even other humans. Gardening from a prairie perspective means coming to terms with what we've eroded and how we can revive wilderness in our communities. Ultimately, it's about the history of a place and a history of close interaction where one life depends on another for survival.
Thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this history of the lawn. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up and remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!
Going to hide away on the little farm in Iowa. I'm going to ride away on the road that leads to yesterday.